I'm Steve Cook,
I'm Kevin Lawnquist.
and welcome to the special video SicEmSportsCast. Kevin, we just finished watching the spring game. First, let me get your general impressions.
Well, given the fact that they had about 9 projected starters out for this game, and then prior to the game, they lost Tanner Thrift, one of their offensive linemen, to an injury. He pulled up lame and didn't play, and then they lost JaMychal Hasty, one of their running backs, on the first play of the scrimmage. It's really kind of hard to tell as to what they did. Now, I think from a standpoint of just doing things the way Matt Rule and his staff want them to do, I think Baylor accomplished that. From an execution standpoint, from a physicality standpoint, you can see Baylor was physical. Execution-wise, they're a little bit off. I think this program still has a long ways to go in terms of where it wants to be, and I don't know what the product that Baylor fans are going to see in the fall is necessarily going to be what Matt Rule eventually envisions this program, but they are making strides. This is, again, I still want to say to everybody that this is still a transition year where everyone kind of has to understand that this is a process that takes time, and especially with guys that are out like these guys, like this program was, it's really kind of hard to gauge how much they could really get done. And again, with most spring games, you're going to have teams that are always going to play it very vanilla, where they're not going to really show too much, and they don't have to. So, but again, they got some work in. It was another time to see each other. Matt Rule made the comment that really the one day where he wanted to see how well his team was competing and where it was executing was 2 days before this spring game on Thursday. Again, we still have a little ways to go.
Big thing I noticed, a lot more short routes, a lot more inside game, a lot more comeback routes, and I didn't see them trying to stretch the field a whole lot.
Yeah, a couple times they did stretch it, but you're right, they didn't. It's kind of like, but this is the Matt Rule way of doing things. I think conceptually speaking, what the fans that were there today got a sense as to this is kind of where how we want to play the game of football. And yeah, they're going to do a lot of stuff between the A gaps, between the guard and between the guards and the center, and again, it's going to be with different players, of course, than what we had out there today. Any style can work, but I also think too that you've got to. But again, it goes back to getting the right personnel to fit it. And from Baylor's point of view, they're on the right path in terms of how they want to go play. It's just a matter of going through this. There's probably going to be some rough road that this team is going to face during the 2017 season, and that's okay. That's just the way things are going to go. People forget that Art Briles went 4-8 in his first 2 seasons here in 2008 and 2009, so it's not going to turn overnight. And if this program does take a little bit of a step back this year from what we've seen for the previous 7 seasons when it made it to a bowl game, that's just part and parcel of how you're now doing business here. So with the I formation, I liked what Matt had to say, and I know you did a great job recording everything today, but what fans are going to kind of laugh at is that when the I formation, that was something that made him happy, and when they were working out of their spread formation, that made the fans in the stands happy. And he has said that throughout the course of the spring, that there's going to be a mix of that throughout the course of the season.
Okay, now let's talk about the quarterbacks. First of all, Zach Smith, I thought he looked pretty good.
I thought he did too. He got off to a little bit of a ragged start, but once he got into it, I thought he looked pretty good. I thought his mid-range balls were pretty good. I thought his deep ball was not as good as it could be. I know he's still limited by where he's at with his ankle. Anu Solomon, a couple of good throws. I thought he might have had the best throw of the day in terms of threading one in the second half against the defense. About a 20-yard route did a great job on threading that. As far as Charlie Brewer is concerned, the mid-semester enrollee from Lake Travis, I really liked what I saw from him. Now, he's behind Zach and Anu, but I liked what he does. He's probably the most mobile of the 3, in my judgment, at least based on what we saw today. Mm-hmm. And because they had him on a lot of rollouts and some bootlegs, and I thought his arm is pretty good. He might actually have, I've always said that Zach's got the biggest arm of anyone of any of the quarterbacks I've seen come through Baylor in recent years. I think Charlie might challenge him for it. Now, Charlie's not as tall, so Zach's kind of that prototypical quarterback. But I liked what I saw out of Charlie today, just because of the fact that he seemed to understand what was asked of him, and of course you could tell he benefits by getting here in January.
He benefits by getting here in January. I think what you're talking about with the rollouts, particularly with a guy that's just starting that rollout, freshmen tend to get happy feet, and so the rollouts kind of help, I think, calm them down. But also the other thing I noticed about Charlie was classic freshman. If his first read wasn't there, he took off.
Yeah, that's going to be part and parcel of how young quarterbacks are going to react, and that doesn't matter if you're a high school or college or in the NFL. That's going to happen. But getting back to Zach Smith, again, I know Matt Rule is not going to announce the starting quarterback. He didn't say anything about it today. The only thing he did say was that he wants to have a decision made, of course, sometime during fall camp. That's totally fine. Everyone's still trying to get used to his system, the way he wants his quarterbacks to work, and basically what they did beginning in late March to where they are now is not enough time to really get a feel for who your starter is. There needs to be more reps, plus the fact you need to see reps with your primary go-to guys, Blake Lynch, Terrence Williams, if they can have him, if Terrence will be back for fall camp with his shoulder injury, those types of things. You've got to get your top personnel in there working with your quarterbacks to see who really connects with those guys the best.
Okay, defense. What defensive line? What were your impressions?
I think this defensive line, the front, is going to be pretty good. The fact that Bravian Roy, I thought he looked really active. He really wasn't talked about today, but I thought that Bravian looked really good out there. Remember, he had the injury with the biceps injury in the Iowa State game last year. And he really wasn't effective even when he returned. But the fact that he's healed and he's back and he's active, that's really big. That's going to be really important. Brian Nance, I thought, looked pretty good as a defensive end. And the fact that they're going to keep him more of a rush type of defensive end, that's probably perfect for him. And then the other one that I felt like is going to be, I think the guy who's probably going to be the leader of this defensive front is KJ Smith. Thought he was a very solid performance, consistent performance. That's what you want from your leaders. Guys like KJ Smith, guys like really even Brian Nance, even though Brian didn't play last year because of the academic suspension. But the fact that he came back, and I think he's realized the value of what that's going to be, the value of what it's going to mean to be back there. I think that's important for them. Now, Matt Rule did talk about with the defense as a whole that they're still a little bit thin in the secondary and that they need a few more guys there. Of course, they didn't have Graylin Arnold, who's been out. I think Graylin has a chance to be probably the best defensive back on this team. Arguably could be the best defensive back that Baylor has had come through its program. And I'm saying that with all due respect to Xavier Howard, who's making a nice living for himself in the NFL. But what I'm saying, though, is that Graylin's technique, you could see toward the end of the year that he was really starting to pick that up. But defensively, I think they're going to be good. I think the key for this team is it's going to pretty much going to be like last year, where it's depth and where health are going to be the two question marks, just because even though they're bringing in 23 guys from this class, from this signing class, they signed 27, 4 arrived in January, and the fact that they've got 23 coming in, those are going to be guys that are going to be more in support roles. And as Matt Rule talked about in the post-spring game presser, that you're just looking for guys that could probably, contribute here and there, maybe just add to your depth a little bit, but nothing of a guy that's going to make an impact. I think if it was their choice that they could slap red shirts on all of them, I think they can do that for a majority of them. I just don't know if they can do that for all of them.
Okay, one thing that I thought was pretty impressive was that they had a 43-yard field goal, and they had a 48-yarder that just pulled right.
Yeah, I thought Connor Martin had a good spring. If he's going to be the, and I'm sure the kicking situation is something that's always going to be evaluated on a day in and day out basis. But Connor Martin, I thought he had a good day today. They got another kid who's a walk-on from Minnesota who's down there who contributed a little bit. He got a couple kicks, but it kind of looks like everything is pointing in Connor Martin's direction. And I know we talked about this in the podcast the other day about between him and Drew Galitz, but in Drew's case, they just kept him at punter, which probably is going to be the best thing for him. I mean, if Connor's the guy, and remember Connor came down here a year ago, and there were some changes with the kicking game at that point. But now he's got a chance to really win the job and be the guy. And, with the exception of the 48, 49-yarder pulling right, the fact that he made a 43-yarder, considering that Baylor's place kicking drama with 40-yard field goals that are never going to come close to the uprights is a step in the right direction. Again, you got to do it in game situations when it really counts, but at least this was a good sign moving forward.
Now, Drew Galitz was down there practicing place kicking on the sidelines. Now, he didn't actually kick any, but doesn't look like they've completely ruled him out doing it.
Probably not. I mean, but if they feel, but this was a good time though for Connor to show what he was in these types of in these game simulated conditions, and so the fact that he rose to the occasion on those, I think, is a good step for him. With Galitz, I'm sure that they're going to work and they're still going to evaluate. I think no matter the level of football, you're always evaluating your kickers unless you've just got a special one like an Adam Vinatieri or Mike Vanderjagt from years gone by, who that was just, you never gave that part of your game a second thought. But if you're a head coach and you still don't know much about who your place kicker is going to be, you're always going to worry about that position because he could have a great game in the opener, and then he could just miss 3 in the second game, and then you've got to start all over again of how do I evaluate this position on my team.
Yeah, and also you always got the possibility of your place kicker's normally also going to be your kickoff guy, and if he gets plowed, because guys kind of like taking out
Sure
a kicker.
they do. Mm-hmm.
Now you've got another guy who may not be as good, but he's there and he's already on your roster, and so you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, and we have to also remember too that the special teams really weren't a part of today's game, other than the punting. That was pretty much just a non-rush situation. Basically, it was a deep snapper and Drew, and then there was a returnman, a lineman acting as a returner. So you have to look at that. I mean, it was all much of a shell, and that's the same thing with the kicking situation. Yeah, it was a situation where the kicker there was a rush. It wasn't a full-scale rush. There wasn't any kind of kickoff returns or kick coverage or anything like that. So the special teams did not get the kind of attention that you would on a grand scale. That'll obviously pick up once they get into fall camp in August.
Now, one thing that I was looking at from the sidelines, kind of hard to tell. I'm going to do a comparison to last year's roster, but to me, this Baylor team does not look as big as some of the ones that Briles brought through.
Probably not, but I also think too that, and given the fact that they lost so many kids, through attrition or just through other issues or simple graduation, that tends to happen. You might see them look a little bit different by the time they hit fall camp, by the time the season opener starts with Liberty. But I also think that that's something that, again, that's part of the transition too, that when you are changing from one administration to a new one, you're just going to have to live with something like that. But they'll get there. I mean, they are a Division I team that's going to challenge for a bowl game, in my opinion. And I've said this before, and I'm going to probably temper it a little bit more, that I thought at first that maybe their low mark was going to be 4 wins and that their high mark is going to be 8. I'm probably going to be a little bit more guarded and say 4 to 6, just because, remember last year's team with the offensive line, even though that group was not as athletic as we've seen with previous other Baylor offensive lines, they didn't get hurt, and that's what allowed Baylor to kind of keep it together for the first half of the season in order to make itself bowl eligible. And if they run into that with injuries, and they're not real deep at that position either, then they're going to have a lot of problems this year. And again, this is all still about guys that, again, when you're changing offenses like this is, where guys now have a playbook as opposed to just having plays, what they were doing with Art, it's so different. And that's just the maturity process and the learning curve. I looked at this spring and I also looked at this game as kind of like a coach and his team still getting to know each other. And that's where they are right now. They're still getting to know each other. And the getting to know you part continues all the way through. This is going to be a pretty important summer for these guys, because Matt Rule talked about them getting into better shape. He didn't feel like they were there in that regard yet. And secondly, just the camaraderie, their chemistry, building those types of things. Matt made a comment earlier in the week on the Big 12 coaches call that he, that some guys, even though everyone is bought in, which is important, but you still have to generate that it factor. And I still think that's where this Baylor team is. You've got to really like each other and then pull for each other. To use an old coaching phrase, pull the rope. Everyone's got to do that, has got to do their part, and they've got to buy in. And even if the season does have its hiccups, or maybe it goes sideways, everyone still has to be on board with this and has to be committed to it. That's what, because if you don't have it committed, if you can't win the locker room right now, then you've got a real problem.
Yeah, and what you were talking about on having tempered expectations, this is a team that they lost pretty much their entire 2016 class.
Right.
And so you don't have really a sophomore class to speak of. And so now you've got that. You've got entirely new offense, entire new defense, entire new philosophy, entire new coaching staff. I think they've still got the same janitors. But, there is going to be a transition, and I think that it's a little bit scary for people who think, oh, they're going to go out there and they're going to be competing, with Oklahoma for the
They're not.
the Big 12 title.
Yeah, they're not doing that right now. They're not going to do that this year. They could do that within the next 2 years, maybe by 2019 is my. But that's where you're at with a 3-year program. Where if you kind of look at, just to use a regional example like SMU, where they're in their 3rd year with Chad Morris, where first year they win 2 games, they looked pretty bad doing it. Last year they were 5-7, just missed a bowl game. They could have won one of their last 2 to get there, but their talent was getting better. And then this year there are a lot of expectations for that program to get there. Now in Baylor's case with Matt, even though this program has been to bowl games 7 consecutive years, you're still talking about a changeover. And again, these are so many different circumstances at this school. This isn't your normal changing of the coach situation here. Again, we're still talking about a lot of off-the-field stuff, of course, that the sexual assault scandal that kind of changed, that flipped the program on its ear. And everyone, even though they hung together last year, they had to bring in someone who was going to change the culture. And Matt Rule talked about the little things, why we do things, about players not arguing with officials, keeping the penalties down, handing the ball back to the officials on certain plays, jerseys tucked in, little things like that. The discipline in the program, which has always been a criticism under Art Briles' tenure, was the lack of it. Now with Matt, it's a 180 of that. So that's kind of where the culture changes too. But these are kids. They want to win. They don't want to feel sorry for themselves. And if they want to have a good season, they've got to work pretty hard this summer to put themselves in a position so that they're ready to go come August.
Okay, any other thoughts?
Other than the fact that the coaches hit the road this week because the evaluation period for recruiting got underway on the 15th. Coaches will be out on the road for the first time this coming week, probably later in the week. And that's okay. As we mentioned in the podcast earlier in the week, that a lot of Texas high school programs are, from the 5A and 6A standpoint, are starting their spring football the week of April 24th because the regional track meets, and so they're going to get a lot of their kids back.
Okay. Well, guys, hope y'all enjoyed it. And spring ball is over. And so now, recruiting until summer ball. Take care.